Someone tried to break into my house and find me. This story happened 3 years ago, around the time that COVID started, so it was a while back, but still worthy of a post. It was early 2020 and I had just gotten a new job in a small town near my area. While looking for a place to live, my sister offered to rent her house to me. She had bought the house 2 years prior, but she and her husband didn't really take to it and their commute to work was long, so they moved out and the house was uninhabited. Luckily for me, it was actually pretty close to my workplace and my sister pretty much rented it for free to me. I just paid for the water and electricity and looked after the house. I was living there for a solid 2 or 3 months and had already gotten used to it. One night after coming back from work and parking my car, as I walked towards my door, I noticed something odd. There was a cigarette butt on the curb to my house. I leaned down and picked it up thinking that it might have been mine since I'm a smoker, but after looking at the brand name I realized that it wasn't mine and threw it away. I didn't think much of it and just shrugged it off as some asshole throwing it at my curb. I went on with my night and nothing unusual happened. 2 days later I was once again walking to my house when I spotted a few more cigarette butts, this time near my porch. Needless to say, I was pissed off and thought that someone sat on my porch and smoked, but since I didn't know who it was, there was nothing I could do about it. I noticed that they were put out pretty recently, so whoever it was probably walked off as I was approaching. That night I was watching a movie on my laptop and it was pretty late, so I was surprised when I heard a car passing by. It's a suburban neighborhood and it was COVID, so people rarely ventured out at night, but I didn't think much of it. Around half an hour later I was surprised when I heard chattering nearby. I listened intently, but I couldn't hear what they were talking about as their voice seemed almost muffled and quiet. By this point I was getting a bit unnerved, so I stopped the movie and quietly got off my sofa and walked to the front door to make sure that it was locked. As I was approaching the door I froze mid-step as I heard the two approaching my porch and reducing their talking to a whisper. I realized right away that whoever this was wanted to break in. I leaned against my front door and waited, expecting a loud bang against the door or the doorknob being shaken, but it was oddly quiet. I decided to walk over to my window to see if they had walked away or changed their mind. My windows have bars from the inside out that you have to unlock so that you could move the curtains or look out the window comfortably. I slowly unlocked the bar mechanism and lifted it up. I moved the curtains and was taken aback. Leaning up against my window was a man. He was as startled as I was because he basically stuttered over his own steps as he jumped back. He tightened his hoodie to cover his face, so all I could really see was his big blue eyes looking at me. His friend realized what was going on and right away started to kick the door in. He kicked it a solid 4 or 5 times, but the door wouldn't budge, all the while I was staring at them frozen in fear and trying to comprehend the situation. I snapped out of it and slammed the bars over my window, locking them and running upstairs to the storage room where I pushed a table up to the door and called the cops. As I listened and expected the two to come inside any minute, I heard a loud crash and the bars from the windows being shaken aggressively. When they realized that they couldn't get in, one of them let out a long angry scream that probably woke up half the neighborhood. By the time the cops came, they were long gone. The police couldn't find out who it was but were more active in the neighborhood in the following weeks. Regardless, I wasn't too keen on staying there, so shortly after I moved out. My sister sold the house a few months later, and as far as I know, nothing similar ever happened since. Someone has been coming into my house when I'm not home. I moved in with my elderly grandmother a few months ago because I got a new job down the street from her house, and she said she'd be happy to have me stay with her. Some context: I used to come visit my grandmother about one weekend a month. About a year ago, while I was visiting, one of her neighbors a couple houses down came to talk to us while we were sitting on the front porch. She informed us that the adult son of the man who lived across the street from them was mentally ill and a peeping Tom. Supposedly he would come stand in this neighbor's yard and just stare into her windows. She got her husband to yell at him, and when he kept doing it, they eventually called the cops. My grandmother remarked that she had seen the cops at this man's house for years and that supposedly a single dad lived there with this adult son who struggled to manage his mental problems. Flash forward to a couple weeks ago. Now living with my grandmother full time, I got home after dark a couple weeks ago and the front door was cracked open. My grandmother is a bit of a safety freak, so she always has her doors locked. I was nervous but tried to hope for the best, thinking my grandmother had forgotten to close the door on the way in with groceries. I go to her room and she said she was certain she locked the door. I tried not to worry about it since nothing had been moved or stolen. The next day when I got home, her car door was cracked open. At this point, I assumed both instances were her and that she was just being forgetful. Well, tonight, my grandmother and I go out for dinner, and therefore I am the one who locked the front door on the way out. She has a doorknob lock and a deadbolt lock above it. I distinctly remember struggling to lock the deadbolt. Sometimes you have to shimmy the door to get the deadbolt to lock, but I got sick of trying and just left it unlocked, satisfied with the doorknob being locked. Funnily enough, as I walked away from the door, I thought to myself, I hope no one breaks in. Well, we get back from dinner and I go to unlock the doorknob, and to my surprise the door wouldn't open because the deadbolt had somehow been locked. It was in that moment I immediately knew someone had been in the house while we were gone and locked the deadbolt back when they left. Once again, nothing had been moved or stolen. The creepy part is that this person is intentionally leaving the doors open and locking back locks that had not been locked on purpose just to creep us out. And he was obviously watching us out his windows to see when we left tonight. I feel certain that it is this mentally ill man who must have gotten hold of a key that my grandmother hid under a mat or something. Why would anyone else do this? If it was a robber, they would have taken something. Reminds me of the first season of American Horror Story, where Jessica Lange's autistic daughter would just randomly sneak into Connie Britton's house. I'm just hoping that if it is this guy down the street, that he is as harmless as that AHS character. I'm going to get the locks changed as soon as possible and install a Ring doorbell camera. What I'm most nervous about is that once I get the locks changed, this guy will know we're onto them and may get mad because they won't get access to their twisted pastime anymore. We live in a gun-friendly state, but I'm afraid of what this guy may do in retaliation. The neighbor who had the peeping Tom incident literally called the cops on him, and she's still alive, so I just hope he leaves us alone and doesn't bother us anymore. Do y'all agree that most signs point to the creeper down the street as the culprit?